This is lecture 95 in the ABCs of Communism series. The fourth lecture in the that support the volume 7 on communism in Europe when it appears later this year. And our topic today is primitive communism in the Paleolithic of Austria and Germany. And as usual, we'll start with the lower Paleolithic. Now in Germany, there are several sites proving humans were in that country by 700,000 years ago. And these people were obviously Homo sapiens, and they continued with this archaic form of technology until the Middle Paleolithic. Now these are pebble and flake tool sites without Levallois technology. In other words, pre-Mousterian. So one of them is Dorn-Durkheim 3, another Karlik A and Karlik B, all dating at 700,000 BP. Karlik H at 618,000 BP has 26 pebble tools and flakes. Meisenheim 1 at 452 BP has 5 flakes. Winningen in a 600,000-year-old gravel deposit has a few choppers and chopping tools, cores, flakes, 2 proto-hand axes, and 1 hand axe. And then we have the Attenfeld site at 500,000 BP with hand axes and cores and flakes. Karlik S at 400,000 BP. Ariendorf 1 at 415,000 BP has 120 artifacts, including 1 unifacial hand axe. Ariendorf 3 at 215,000 BP has a few artifacts. Between Ariendorf 1 and 3, level 2 has 37 artifacts. Then at Karstein at 250,000 BP we have a few chopper and chopping tools. At Randalen D1 and C1 we have 3 pebble tools and flakes. At Bad Cannstatt at 400,000 to 145,000 BP there are 3,000 artifacts recorded, including 1 marked small tool component, MSTC. And then at Schoningen 12 from the Reinsdorf Interglacial, MISH, with stone tools and 1 MSTE, that is the marked small tool component. Now, Schoningen 13.1 at 400,000 BP has stone tools and 1 of these marked stone tool components. Schoningen 13.2 at the late Reese Interglacial with 1,200 stone tools and 1 MSTC. Schoningen at 300,000 BP with 8 perfectly preserved wood spears. And finally at Bitzingsleben at 420 to 350,000 BP we have stone tools and 1 MSTC. Now, at Sloningen, the bones of large mammals, that is elephants, rhinoceroses, horses, and lions, as well as the remains of amphibians, reptiles, shells, and even beetles, have been preserved in the brown coal. Pines, firs, and black alder trees are preserved complete with pine cones, as have the leaves, pollen, and seeds of surrounding flora. Some of the most important finds have been remains of a water buffalo in the context of human habitation, and almost completely preserved oryx, one of the oldest in Central Europe, and several concentrations of stone artifacts, bones, and wood. They allow the scientists to examine an entire landscape instead of just one site. Now that makes Schoningen an exciting location and global reference point for archaeology, quaternary ecology, and climate research. So a research center and museum has been built there that provides information not only to investigators but to the public at large about the work that's going on. Now little was known about the organic component of lower and middle Paleolithic technologies, but with respect to wooden tools, these wooden throwing spears are about 300,000 years old, and they were discovered in 1995 at Schoningen, Germany. They were found in association with stone tools and the butchered remains of more than 10 horses. Well, that brings us to the Middle Paleolithic, or Mousterian, which in Germany is defined by the appearance of a method of stone tool making known as the Levallois Technique, as it is everywhere. Now the technique named after the type site of the Levallois-Perret suburb of Paris, France. Levallois developed from the Acheulean technology in a mosaic fashion and Levallois advanced the striking of flakes in a logical way from what had been done in the Acheulean industries, beginning with the tortoise-shaped prepared core. That is to say, that the stone tool maker took a core and trimmed its edges by flaking. Now, trimming means removing pieces of the rock to get an outline of the intended flake. The core would eventually acquire a distinctive tortoiseshell appearance. This technique allows greater control over the size and shape of the flake products than had the previous Acheulean technology. The Middle Paleolithic Toolkit, the earliest one in Germany and Austria with Middle Paleolithic features, has hand axes as well as hafted flake tools. Now, hafting means attaching a trimmed for shape flake with a sharp cutting edge connected to the end of a spear or arrow. Now, the mature toolkit of the Middle Paleolithic features the primary technique of Levallois flake and blade removal from a prepared core. These flakes are used to make broad triangular projectile points and cutting edge or blunted edge tools for working hides as cutters and scrapers. These Levallois removals are either flakes or blades. The flakes were retouched, shaping and perfecting suboval, subquadrangular, triangular, or leaf-shaped projectile points to be fitted on the ends of spears or arrow shafts. Levallois blades begin as oval or rectangular blanks removed from basely prepared cores after correction for the convexity of the core. They come in two manufacturing mode types. One are the pebble cores made of rocks or rock fragments and the percussion removal of blades. And two, the bipolar core removed blades from rocks placed against an anvil and struck from the top of a rock so situated. Now, for our purposes, the most important thing to take note of is that the explosion of tool types is a proof of the emergence of broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation. This increasing knowledge about the world in which people lived was preparing them for the Neolithic Revolution, because the bank of knowledge they acquired in their time cogitating about the world around them made it inevitable. However, the dialectical opposite of not producing things for food, clothing, shelter, and so forth came about as a product of spare time spent on thinking about the world around them. This Hegelian juxtaposition is the very essence of what was driving the forward motion of society and culture. At any rate, the German Middle Paleolithic has two stages with abundant archaeological sites. The Amiens interglacial, that is MIS 5E, and two, the Weichellian interplaneglacial, MIS 3. Now, that's marine interstadial. On the other hand, several stages were seemingly void of any population. The second half of MIS 6 and MIS 4 and two long periods, MIS 86 and MIS 5D 5A, have produced very few archaeological sites. Recent excavations have exposed small-scale complexity in annual cycles, mobility cycles, functional cycles, intergroup, intrasite, and even intratool class variation. Not all variations are due to distinctiveness in time and space. The majority of all assemblages seem to belong to the latest part of the Middle Paleolithic, during the first half of MIS 3. Concerning this period, the Layer G stratigraphic complex, or G complex, of Cecil Felskrot yielded the longest cultural sequence of late Middle Paleolithic unifacial plus bifacial industries. And Kyle Messer-Gruppen, Mycokian, in the sense of Mousterian with a Mycokian option, MMO, in Central Europe. This sequence produced evidence for an earlier MMO stage without Levallois technology, which is called MMOA, and a later stage, MMOB, with Levallois technology, both stages occurring at the very end of the European Middle Paleolithic between 60,000 and 43,000 BP. The vast majority of all Middle Paleolithic sites in Germany belong to the MMOB, which was in southern Germany, rapidly followed by the Upper Paleolithic Aurignacian from 42,000 BP onwards, without any Proto-Aurignacian interlude. Now, the Middle Paleolithic to Upper Paleolithic at Ranis Cave, R-A-N-I-S. The Ranis Cave site is another important Paleolithic data point, this time for the Middle to Upper Paleolithic transition in central Germany. Bifacial leaf points similar to those from Ranis and the Jerzmanowick blade points can be assigned to the final Middle Paleolithic. The stratigraphy of Ranis reinforces the type technological arguments for a late transition period assemblage where the final Middle Paleolithic is overlain by an earlier Upper Paleolithic assemblage. Prior to the field work in the autumn of 2015, 6 resistivity profiles, in each case 48 electrodes were half a meter distance, were measured to get a better idea of where the previous trenches were located and how deep the deposits are, the presence of boulders, and the configuration of the bedrock. This is a form of technology that's borrowed from the petroleum industry that I've used myself in various parts of the world. The calculated virtual plans and profiles from this data set provide some insights into the depths of the layers and potential starting points for the new excavation. Now additionally, we did percussion core drilling, and the material was used to better interpret the resistivity data and to help confirm a distinction between refilling and intact deposits. And here it was achieved a depth of about 4.1 meters, or about 14 feet. In 2016, archaeologists began digging the west-east trench in front of the cave, and during the 7 weeks of field work in 2016, they excavated in situ sediments to a depth of 3.6 meters, and excavations are continuing, or were continuing, in 2017. Now, in the Upper Paleolithic for Germany, a driver in the technological evolutions of humans between 45,000 and 30,000 BP was the search for solutions in the arming of projectiles. There are chronological and technological distinctions of 2 major traditions, the Proto-Aurignacian and the Early Aurignacian. The most frequent game species during the Upper Paleolithic are horse, mammoth, and reindeer. However, these animals are represented by specific skeletal elements that were important as raw material for the production of organic tools. The large variety of organic tools made from bone, antler, and ivory, and the refuse resulting from their production in Upper Paleolithic layers stands in contrast to the extreme rarity of organic tools and production debris in the Middle Paleolithic layers. The faunal assemblages in the Auk Valley document continuity in the seasonal use of the landscape and the preferred game, but reflect changes in the use of sites and organic technology between the Middle and the Upper Paleolithic. Now, with regard to Upper Paleolithic tools, dates run between 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, but what is most important to remember is that there was a second great explosion of artifact types. You will recall that the first such blossoming in the technology of Homo's mode of production started at the beginning of the Middle Paleolithic. Fish hooks and harpoons give proof of fishing. Flint tools, manufacturing features industries based on white, fine blades rather than simple and short flakes. Burins and racklors were used to work bone, antler, and hides. The animal oil lamp, rope, and the eyed needle appear. In the social organizational component of the mode of production, there was also significant change. Now there is evidence of homes and camp settlements outside of caves, and some have storage pits. Cave life now features a superstructural component as artistic work blossomed into cave painting. There was also rock art in the form of petroglyphs, while bone and ivory carving and engraving became common. Stone tools from the Aurignacian culture we call Mode 4 appear, characterized by blades being made rather than flakes, typical of the Mode 2 Acheulean and Mode 3 Mousterian, from prepared cores. Also seen throughout the Upper Paleolithic is more tool standardization. The use of bone and antler tools allowed tool makers to achieve precise forms repeatedly. Now, the early Aurignacian people moved seasonally over great distances to get reindeer herds within the cold and open environments. The last glacial maximum was followed by the Allerod Oscillation, a warm and moist global interstadial dating 13,800 to 13,500 BP. Then there was a very rapid onset, perhaps within as little as a decade, of the cold and dry, younger Dryas climate period, giving subarctic conditions to much of northern Europe. The preboreal rise in temperature from 10,300 to 9,000 BP had brought temperatures nearly to present-day levels, although the climate was wetter and the Upper Paleolithic gave way to the start of the Mesolithic archaeological period. The glaciers receded and sea levels rose. The English Channel, Irish Sea, and North Sea were above water, and the Black Sea was a freshwater lake. Now changing was the Atlantic coastline, initially farther into the sea than today, and the Mediterranean coastline has retreated far less, except in the north of the Adriatic and the Aegean. This rise in sea levels continued until at least 7,500 BP. Accordingly, evidence of human activity along Europe's coasts in the Upper Paleolithic is largely gone. Some traces have been recovered by marine archaeology from the lost area beneath the North Sea. From 42 to 37,000 BP, there is an early cultural center in the Swabian Alps, where the earliest figurative art, the Venus of Whole Fels, accompanies the beginning of the Aurignacian. The first flutes appear in Germany. The lion human was created in the Hohenstein Stadel and is now in the Ulmer Museum in Ulm, Germany. Now, as for the Aurignacian, although the type site for the Aurignacian archaeological manifestation is in southwest France at Aurignac, the Haute-Garonne site, it occurs in Germany as well as in much of Europe. An Upper Paleolithic early Aurignacian or Proto-Aurignacian stage dates from 43,000 to 37,000 BP. The Aurignacian itself lasts from 37,000 to 33,000 years ago. And a late Aurignacian phase transitional alongside the Gravettian runs from 33,000 to 26,000 BP. Old human figurative art, the Venus of Whole Fels, comes from the Aurignacian. It was discovered in September 2008 in a cave at Schocklingen in Baden-Württemberg in western Germany. The Bacco-Kiro site is one of the earliest known Aurignacian burials. Worked bone or antler bone with grooves cut into their bottoms are diagnostics of the Aurignacian Toolkit, and flint tools include fine blades and bladelets that tool makers struck from prepared cores rather than using crude flakes. Perforated rods, thought to be spear throwers or shaft wrenches, are found at Aurignacian sites. Aurignacian people produced some of the earliest cave art, including the animal engravings at Trois Frères and the paintings at Chauvet Cave in southern France. They also made pendants, bracelets, and ivory beads, as well as three-dimensional figures. Aurignacian figurines have been found depicting now extinct animals, including mammoths, rhinoceros, and the tarpan wild horse. In association are anthropomorphized depictions that are evidence of anthropomorphism in their animism and animatism, as are statuettes of women called Venus figurines, emphasizing the hips, breasts, and other body parts associated with fertility, with feet and arms absent or minimized. One of the most ancient of them was discovered in the Whole Fels cave in Germany. Many 35,000-year-old animal figurines were discovered in the Vogelherd cave in Germany. One of the horses amongst 6 tiny mammoths and horse ivory figures found previously at Vogelherd was sculpted as skillfully as any piece found in Europe's Upper Paleolithic anywhere. The production of ivory beads for body ornamentation was also important during the Aurignacian, and the famous paintings in the Chauvet cave date from this period. Aurignacian finds include bone flutes. The oldest undisputed musical instrument was the Whole Fels flute, discovered in the Whole Fels cave in Germany's Swabian Alps in 2008, and this flute was made from a vulture's wing bone perforated with 5 finger holes, again dating to 35,000 years ago. By 37,000 BP, the Aurignacian culture, with its distinctive mode of production, extended throughout Germany, Austria, and much of continental Europe. Now, for the Gravettian, we have seen that it's an archaeological industry of the European Upper Paleolithic that evolved from the Aurignacian by 33,000 years BP and mostly gone by 22,000 BP, although some elements of it lasted until 17,000 BP. As an industrial type, it appears to have been associated with the extreme cold of that glacial period. So it's probably a toolkit associated or made primarily for controlling or for making clothing, presumably used in the manufacture of clothing and perhaps shelter. In France and Iberia, with shorter exposures to subarctic cold, it was quickly replaced by the Solutrean, and in altered form continued as the Epigravettian in Germany, northern Italy, the Balkans, Ukraine, and Russia. Now, these Gravettian industry carriers were Aurignacian hunter-gatherers living in a bitterly cold part of Europe. The Gravettian version of the Aurignacian lifestyle was a special hunting Upper Paleolithic adaptation to climate in West and Central Europe. Gravettian hunting culture appears much more mobile and complex. They lived in caves or semi-subterranean or rounded dwellings that were typically arranged in small villages. And Gravettians were innovators of such tools as blunted back knives, tanged arrowheads, and boomerangs, and in the use of woven nets and stone lamps. Blades and bladelets were used to make decorations and bone tools from animal remains. An additional perspective is that of the Weisselian glaciation, an environmental fluctuation to which they were able to adapt by adding to what was already in their Aurignacian toolkit. Archaeologists usually describe two regional variants of this toolkit. One is the Western Gravettian, known mainly from cave sites in France, Spain, and Britain, and two is the Eastern Gravettian in Central Europe and Russia. The Eastern Gravettians, which include the Pavlovian culture, were specialized mammoth hunters, whose remains are found in open-air sites. Gravettian culture extended across what was a large, relatively homogeneous subarctic region until 27,000 BP. Diagnostic tools were made of quartz and other rock crystals, typologically varied in striking platforms, abrasions, end scrapers, and burins. Hammerstones and bones were used in the process of lithic reduction, and blades were to skin animals and sharpen sticks. Aurignacian carriers of the Gravettian industries had simple, purpose-built burials, offerings and personal ornaments owned by the deceased were placed within the grave or tomb. Gravettian art includes numerous cave paintings and small portable Venus figurines made from clay or ivory and jewelry. 100 of these fertility deities date from the early Gravettian. They conform to a very specific physical type of large breasts, broad hips, and prominent posteriors. The statuettes tend to lack facial details, with limbs that are often broken off. During the post-glacial period, evidence of the Gravettian industrial culture begins to disappear from northern Europe as the need for subarctic technology decreased. Other Gravettian traits continued in areas around the Mediterranean. Now, hunting animals was the first object of food procurement, as animals were the primary food source for Gravettian industry-carrying Aurignacian people. Clubs, sticks, and stones were their main hunting raw materials. A diagnostic artifact of Gravettian industry is the gravet point. It is a small pointed blade with a straight blunt back. They were used to hunt big game. Many animals were hunted at close range. Gravettians also used nets to hunt small game and hunted with their own invented bow and arrow. Now, Europe being extremely cold during this period meant food sources needed to be high in fat content for energy. We know that ethnographic populations at higher latitudes place greater dietary emphasis on meat. Now, given their ability to move with the herds, Gravettian diets incorporated a huge variety of animal prey. The main factors were the animal's age and size. For example, first-year deer offered hides most suitable for clothing, while fourth-year deer contained far more meat. Gravettian diet included larger animals such as mammoths, hyenas, wolves, and reindeer killed with stone or bone tools. In addition, their broad-spectrum wild resource exploitation scooped up hares, that is rabbits, and foxes captured with nets. Gravettians arrived on subarctic coasts and meant that they could get their hands on marine protein seasonally. Coastal Gravettians in Italy and Wales had 20 to 30% of their diets from sea animals. Populations inhabiting lower latitudes were able to get more fish and shellfish, while higher latitude diets featured seal consumption. Now, Gravettian settlers tended toward the valleys that pooled migrating prey. An example is the Levallois site in southern Italy, where there is a strategic Gravettian settlement in a small valley. As the settlers became more aware of the migration patterns of animals like red deer, they learned to trap herds in valleys, eliminating the need to travel long distances for food. In Levallois, the glacial topography forced the deer to pass through the areas in the valley occupied by humans. Discoveries in the Czech Republic suggest that nets were used to capture large numbers of smaller prey, thus offering a quick and consistent food supply and an alternative to the feast and famine pattern of large game hunting. Evidence comes in the form of a 4 millimeter thick rope preserved on clay imprints. The weaving of nets was a communal task, relying on the work of both women and children in hunting. Now, the Gravettian era landscape was similar to the landscape of present-day Moravia. Pavlov I in southern Moravia is the most complete and complex Gravettian site to date, and a perfect model for a general understanding of Gravettian culture. In many instances, animal remains indicate both decorative and utilitarian purposes. In the case of, for example, Arctic foxes, incisors and canines were used for decoration, while their humeri and radii bones were used as tools. Now, similarly, the skeletons of some red foxes contain decorative incisors and canines, as well as ulnas, used for awls and barbs. Some animal bones were only used to create tools. Due to their shape, the ribs and fibulas and metapodia of horses were good for awl and barb creation. In addition, the ribs were also implemented to create different types of smoothers for pelt preparation. And the shapes of rabbit bones are also unique, and therefore the ulnas were commonly used as awls and barbs. Reindeer antlers, ulna ribs, tibias, and teeth were utilized in addition to a rare documented case of a phalanx. Mammoth remnants are among the most common bone remnants of the culture, while long bones and molars are also documented. Some mammoth bones were used for decorative purposes, and wolf remains were often used for tool production and decoration. Around 34,000 BP, the Gravettian culture appears in the Crimean mountains of southern Ukraine. By 24,000 BP, the Solutrean and Gravettian carriers occupied the southwestern range of Europe. Now, these cultures are part of transitional cultures, where the techniques have some similarities that are both very different from classical ordination. The Gravettian soon disappears from southwestern Europe, while the notable exception of the Mediterranean coast, with the notable exception of the Mediterranean coast of Iberia. Now, around 19,000 BP, Europe witnesses the appearance of a new culture known as the Magdalenian, evolving from the Aurignacian and superseding the Solutrean area and the Gravettian Aurignacian of Central Europe. However, in Mediterranean Iberia, Italy, and Eastern Europe, Epigravettian cultures continue evolving locally. With the Magdalenian culture, Paleolithic developments in Europe reached its peak. Around 12,500 BP, the Würm glacial ends, and the Magdalenian culture persisted until 10,000 BP, and then it quickly evolved into two microlithic cultures, as we discussed before, the Azilian in Spain and southern France, and the Sauveterrian in northern France and central Europe. Now, the latter are described in the literature as either Epipaleolithic or Mesolithic. Although there are some differences, both cultures share several traits, namely the creation of very small stone tools called microliths, and a scarcity of figurative art that vanished, being replaced by abstract decoration of tools, and in the Azilian, pebbles. In the late phase of this Epipaleolithic period, the Salvatore culture evolves into the Tardenoisian and influences strongly its southern neighbor, replacing it in the Mediterranean of Spain and Portugal. Now, the recession of the glaciers allows human colonization in northern Europe. The Maglemosian culture, derived from the Salvatore Tardenois culture, but with a strong personality, colonizes Denmark and the nearby regions, including parts of Britain. Now, for another comment on the Hohlfels cave in the Swabian Jura of Germany, it has yielded a number of Aurignacian archaeological finds, as we pointed out before. Now, artifacts found in the cave represent some of the earliest examples of prehistoric art and musical instruments ever discovered in Europe. The cave is just outside the town of Schlesingen in the state of Baden-Württemberg near Ulm. Its cave entrance is 1,752 feet above sea level. The cave consists of a tunnel of about 15 to 49 feet in length and a main hall with a volume of 210,000 cubic feet, making the cave hall one of the largest of southern Germany. The first excavation took place there in 1870, and that yielded remnants of cave bears, reindeer, mammoths, and horses, as well as tools belonging to the Aurignacian culture of the Upper Paleolithic. Further excavations during 1958 and 1960, 1977, and then in 2002 yielded a number of spectacular finds. These include several specimens of prehistoric sculpture, such as an ivory bird and a human-lion hybrid figure, similar to the Lowen Mensch figurine, but only 2.5 centimeters tall. In 2005, one of the oldest phallic representations was discovered. In 2008, a team from the University of Tübingen, led by Nicholas Conard, discovered an artifact known as the Venus of Hohlfels and dated it to about 35,000 BP. This is the earliest known Venus figurine and the earliest undisputed example of expressly human figurative art. The team also unearthed a bone flute in the cave and found 2 fragments of ivory flutes in nearby caves. The flutes date back to at least 35,000 BP and are some of the earliest musical instruments ever found in Europe. In 2012, it was announced that an earlier discovery of bone flute fragments in the Geiben-Kostleri cave now date to 42,000 BP. The remains of at least 5 distinct individuals were found at Hohlfels. The Hohlfels samples were found genetically closest to other samples from the Magdalenian, and these show their closest genetic affinity to each other and for other samples taken from the Swabian Jura, such as the Berlin hole. They also show genetic affinity to another Magdalenian sample taken from the Red Lady of El Miron, as well as a sample from the Aurignacian at Goya Caves. That brings us to a conclusion of our discussion of the primitive communism, the hunting and gathering Paleolithic in Germany. And next we're going to move on to the British Isles.